Okay, warm welcome to this session about experimentation and anticipation and how to succeed being data-driven at different stages of maturity. I have a little experiment actually giving this speech. We're testing the idea of whether you can use the level of stage of maturity to see which kind of experiment should I be running for this. But I'm going to start by talking a little bit about experimentation overall and how to be good at it and when to do it. So let's get into it. My name is Agnes Sävenstedt. And my background is from the media industry. I was head of innovation at Aftonbladet, which is the largest media company in Sweden. Where I started out there in the early 2010s. And that's when I learned about experimentation. We had turnover of 2.1 billions, and 1.8 of those billions came from the daily paper. And we had a daily circulation of 500,000 copies, which is pretty good in a country with Sweden that's only 10 million people. And when we were anticipating the future and looking forward and seeing what we thought would happen come further, then we said, well, maybe we could have 100,000 people reading copies in the daily circulation when more and more people turn to online news instead. So we were at the pivoting point where we had to decide whether we wanted to just become a small company and fire 75% of people and make this daily paper for where we change our costume so the money we made from 100,000 copies would be enough, or if we could actually start making money from the fact that we were Sweden's largest website. And we were super successful. We experimented our way into actually being the first media company in the world where revenue from online outgrew revenue from the paper. So super successful transformation, but we weren't very good at experimentation. It cost so much money. Everything we would test would cost millions of euros, and it would be really painful to the organizations. So since then, I've been a consultant since 2011, and then I tried to help other organizations to run their experimentation smoother and faster and in a smaller scale, basically. And yes, so this is the short version of what I'm going to talk to you, and you can see whether you want to join for the long session or if this is not your subject. Basically, we're going to talk about when you're doing business as usual, you have data and you can do analysis on that data to use as the basis for prognosis of where you're going in the future. And when you're doing new things, as you're doing when you're anticipating the future, then you don't have any data. It's important to remember that then you need to work with formulating hypotheses and running experiments to test those hypotheses instead. And I think it's interesting that when people talk about being data-driven and using data for innovation, it's so often that they actually use data from what their customers are doing today and try to use that data to predict the future, anticipate the future. We're going to see in this talk if worldly mapping and maturity stages can help us to understand when at what stage can you do and can you do experiments and run them on current data from what your current users are doing. But first things first, you should always start by understanding whether you should be innovating at all. When you're anticipating the future, maybe look 5 years ahead and see if we keep doing what we're doing today, little bit better every year, where would that take us in 5 years? And then you look at your business plans or your growth plans or your expectations from your investors or whatever it is that's driving you. And you can see, where does that say we need to be 5 years from now? And you can draw that curve. And then you can see that the difference between the two curves, that's your growth gap. And if you have a large growth gap, then of course you're going to be needing to do a lot of things up in the left corner of your Wordly map, where you're close to the customer and you want to do really new things, because what you're doing today is not going to be exciting enough, and you're not going to be able to grow enough within that area. So that's a very, very useful concept to always start with when you try to understand how are we going to approach the future. And we call what you're doing with the lower curve when you're improving your current business, we can call that your continuous improvement work. That's something you do to keep your current business better. And in the same way, we can talk about continuous strategy when we look at your growth curve, because that's where you need to be. You need to start continuously working on developing that strategy that can help you to understand, how am I going to fill this growth gap? So when I use those terms, you know what I mean. You know what my intention is, at least. And when you have this continuous strategy work and the continuous improvement work, the one thing you want to do, you want to experiment your way to understand what's going to fill your growth gap. And you do not want to risk everything that makes you survive as a company or as an organization. So make sure that whatever is done within really wide experimentation, it should never risk your current business. You should be safe and do continuous improvement work there. You should not risk the entire operations. And there are totally different ways of working. And I think this is a pretty good allegory, where you look at the freight ship. That's your daily operations day. It's highly specialized to do what you're doing today in a very efficient way and cost-effective way. And when you want to do your continuous strategy work, then you want to work in a totally different way. You want to work with sending out these little pilot boats that you see here that can say, you can go into different harbors and see, okay, is there a safe way that I can sail into this harbor? Or if you have a really tight passage coming up ahead, you can send your pilot boat to find a safe way forward for you. And getting that to work is one of the key elements in succeeding in your anticipation work. You can do all kinds of trend scouting and scenario analysis within the big company. And the big company can have sort of like a hypothesis of which direction they're going to go in. And then you can send out your little pilot boats to run experiments to see if that's really a good direction to go in, and if there's a safe way forward there. And these two elements, the little pilot boat and the big freight ship, they have to work in totally different ways. And this is the business as usual boat, the freight ship. We can call that strategic certainty. You know pretty much what happens in this space. You can look at what you've done before and see. You're pretty sure if I want to change my business a little bit, you know pretty good what it takes, what it's going to cost, how you're going to do it. But when you're in new turf, when you're trying to find a new way forward, then we call it strategic uncertainty, because you actually don't know if it is a good idea to go in this direction. And when you're doing business as usual, you can do analysis and prognosis, because you actually have a lot of data. And this is how we would make all our decisions, basically, in Aftonbladet. We would invest enormous amounts of money based on analysis and prognosis on data of business today. But that was business about our current about business at the time, and actually told us nothing about where we were heading in the future, especially when we were doing so totally new thing as online rather than paper. And but still, we would apply the same kind of tools to do analysis and to understand if an idea is good or not within the totally new things online, as we did when we were doing our business as usual. But what you need to do is, whenever you're doing things that you haven't done before, you need to remember that even if you make this beautiful spreadsheet that tells you that if I use the churn numbers from this service that we're already running, and I presume that people will act as they're doing in this part of this business today, then this is actually going to be a good idea for us to launch this new online service, or what it is we're trying to do. So, but when you are in that new turf, when it's not business as usual, you cannot analyze current data. You have to build new data. And the way you build that data is by running experiments. So, and we call that the hypothesis-based approach. And basically, that is about making decisions. Is this a good direction to go in when you're in strategic uncertainty and it's a new field that you don't know? So what you do is you set up hypotheses that it is a good direction to go in, or it's a good service to launch, or whatever. And you set experiments, or you build experiments to test those hypotheses. And while running those experiments, you collect data. And that data eventually will tell you, is this hypothesis true? Or were we assuming something that wasn't true whatsoever? So you get this loop going. Hypothesis, experiments, collecting data to see if that hypothesis is true or not. And you're starting to learn, and you're starting to build a lot of data. So basically, what you do when you're making strategic decisions in strategic uncertainty is you run a whole lot of experiments, a whole series of experiments, until you've collected enough data so that you can actually analyze that data and build prognosis based on that. And you can probably build that business case eventually that you might be your decision-making tool when you're in strategic certainty. So that's the setting of being successful in running experiments. And this is where I would like to do a little experiment, a little test. I have an hypothesis that we can use our Wordly maps and our Simon's cheat sheet to understand what kind of experiment should I be running and how should I design those experiments based on the different stages of maturity that we are in. And then we take this cheat sheet and we look at market action, where we are told that for Genesis, market action is probably gambling, and it's probably driven by gut feeling. In custom made, we are at a stage where we're exploring a found value. So trying to understand if this is repeatable, or if it's just at this one place where we custom made it that it exists. When we are in product stage, that's when we actually do the kinds of experiments that a lot of innovation, I mean, when you talk about data-driven innovation, a lot of the experiments that people talk about is actually market analysis and listening to customers. And that is super helpful if you want to do continuous improvement on your current product. And it's very, very important, since you have to make sure that your lower curve in your growth gap keeps growing also. So it's very, very important work, but it's not something that should be a big part of your anticipation work when you're trying to understand what is going to be the thing that's going to fill the growth gap for our organization. And it's going to make a totally new and future-proof version of our organization. And in commodity state, then it's metric-driven, build what is needed. And of course, it's not an area where you want to spend a whole lot of your development or innovation capacity, basically. So let's run this little test then. And talking about experimentation in Genesis stage. So this is pretty much innovation. Very high. We're doing some kind of invention. We have some early idea. And probably, the hypothesis we should be testing at this time is probably, is there even a need for this that we're doing? And potentially, is there a willingness to pay for this that we're doing? And here, my hypothesis is that we should use Steve Blank. And what he says is that you should start in the middle when you're at this stage. When you're not very good. You don't have a very, very clear idea of what you're doing. You're probably not very eloquent when you're pitching what you're doing. But any type of experiment where you put together a pitch of this new idea you have in Genesis, and you pitch it to the people you're presuming are going to be users of this, then you do this pitch, and you make sure that you can really see them really close, and you watch when their pupils dilate. So basically, you start to talk about, okay, what is it I'm trying to achieve, and see, okay, is there a common point where a lot of stakeholders within this area, where their pupils dilate, and you can see that they bend forward and that they really interact with what you're doing. So here's your test pitches, those kinds of experiments, basically, to really understand, is there a need for this at all? And do people actually know that they have the need for that my idea is meeting? And potentially, are they willing to pay either with time or money to get help to meet this need? So then we move into custom-made and exploring a found value. So basically, you have this idea that you've proven that there actually is a need, that there is a willingness to pay from at least one entity. And if this is actually something that you're delivering to one client, maybe you've started during your Genesis experiments, you've started selling this to help one customer meet this need during some kind of behind the scenes testing, or faking that you actually have the solution already in place. Then you are ready to jump into experimentation to understand if this value is applicable to more people. Are there more people who want this? And also, probably, do I, as a brand, have credibility within this area? So we've proven that there is a need. Now we need to prove, is this a repeatable need that a lot of people have, or a lot of organizations have if I'm B2B? And do I, with my brand, have a credibility within this area? So those are the hypotheses we want to test. And first, and then really good tests are any kind of pre-selling, like we're doing landing page tests to see if we promote this to a lot of people, do they recognize this need that we're solving? We can do fake sales on those landing pages to see if they want to, if I explain what this product is, will several people say that they're actually willing to buy this? And we can also do co-creation here, probably, where we look at if this is something that we're actually already delivering to somebody, to one person, to invite other people who are pretty much the same as that person or organization, that customer, and to see how, if we're doing a co-creation session with them, how would they want to use this? And we can get them to ideate about what this product version, how would they want help to solve this? And here you can also do a whole lot of experimentation to understand the solution hypothesis, because this is where you really need to prove that, okay, I can do this repeatedly without, it's ready for product phase. I can deliver it repeatedly, and it is still cost efficient to deliver, to do that delivery. I can switch from just doing it for one party to doing it repeatedly the same way for a lot of customers. So, and here you're very much still, both Genesis and Custom Made, it's very much about filling the growth gap that you're in. And perhaps when you move into product and commodity, that's more about improving your lower curve, the continuous improvement. So how would you design experiments in the product stage? Well, our cheat sheet says that we can do market analysis and we can listen to our customers. And what we do when we're doing that, that's basically looking at a lot of data, trying to find interesting patterns within that data to understand how people are using the product the way you're supposing them to use. If they're using it in totally different ways than you've planned for them to use, or if their usage is changing, perhaps it's very different approaches to how you solve things within your product, anything. Basically, what you do is you look at the data to get all kinds of ideas to how could we improve our product, or actually also we can get ideas of things that we could then move to start exploring in Genesis or Custom Made, because perhaps there's something, a need that our customers are trying to get the current product to solve, and we're actually not solving. So basically, at this stage, we're using data to ideate, to find new ideas on how we can do improvement. And then when we come to commodity, it's, I mean, the stage we're in, how it's described, how we recognize that's where we are. Basically, it's metric driven, and we need to build what is needed. So here we're totally into optimization. This is continuous improvement. We're trying to reduce waste. We're trying to be more cost efficient. And we're not very much focusing our future anticipation powers to spend development money within this space. But of course, it could very well help us a lot with our lower curve. So that was my little run through of how I believe we can use the different stages and their maturity level to choose what kind of experiments we're going to design. And if you want more tips on experiment design. There's a really good, this is pretty old by now, it's probably 7 years or something, Alexander Osterwald blog post that's called How Strong is Your Innovation Evidence, that talks about the whole different kinds of experiment that you can use as a guide to pick different kinds of experiments. And by that, I hope that I've given you some ideas on how you can use Wordly maps to see in which kinds of experiments you're going to send out your little pilot boats. And yes, this is how you get hold of me. And I'm actually going to stop, or I can have my sharing on. But I would really need your or want your input at this time. I've spent my half hour talking, and now we have 15 minutes to reflect based on this talk. So, any comments or questions from the audience?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Agnes. Here's Thomas from Cologne, Germany.
Nice to meet you, Thomas.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for that. I found it good to compare the different, because I'm doing exactly this, and in my actual consulting project, I'm now validating some theses. We have developed some ideas from design sprints, and now you'll be switching always between desirability, feasibility, and viability. And sometimes, and I think it was a good overview how about the depth of the analysis you take. Yeah, the question would be, for instance, when you have sketched ideas that are coming just from the mind, from creative processes. In design sprints, you also use creativity methodologies, and you never know what's coming out. Would you put also, that was an idea coming up to my mind now, would you also put the ideas in a kind of Wordly map? Just we have this was the customer needs, and this is idea 1, this is idea 2, this is idea 3, and we could also put that and segment it a little bit with that. Yeah, just this is a genesis idea, this is a custom made idea, and then you go to value chain map downstream, and you say, okay, upward, downwards, and you look, okay, what is needed for this idea, what is needed for this idea, and that was just a little thinking to combine design sprints and what you think.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. And we actually, in a project that we're running right now, we're experimenting on cloud services within an organization, and how we're using design thinking to find really exciting experiments or really interesting challenges, so that we could potentially solve by going cloud in different elements. And then we did exactly that. We would sort of like, okay, so we have all these different problems, and when we started ideating different solutions, we would look at, okay, so what is going to happen when everything moves to the right? What might potentially happen within this area? And then we could sort of like help that to know which ideas we were going to go further with. But I've never done it with solution sketches in a design sprint, but that would be super fun.
It was an idea.
I'll do that next time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just thank you.
Thank you.
I switch off my camera and let somebody else on this question.
And I can pick one from the chat in the meantime. As is experimentation continuous for all stages of product development? Yes, is it? I guess it should be, because unless you've put that idea or that product into end of life, but you need to do for every new thing or every improvement you're doing, I guess that's some kind of mini experiment that you should be running. But they would be very, very basic and probably more part of your usual development cycle. Perhaps it's, you can call every time that you're building something within a sprint, and you showcase that to during the demo, the sprint demo or Kanban demo, whatever methodology you're using. That is, of course, always an experiment. So as long as you're developing, I think you're still experimenting. Any more questions or comments? Any favorite experiments that you like to run? I think we have a question here. If we think of experiments on a Wordly map, how does visibility affect things? Yes, that is a super good question, of course, because that should really be one of the parts. That should really be one of the important parts of what type of experiments you should be choosing. We should probably put that into the picture also, because if it has a lot of visibility, then you would run the experiments where you actually have the end user, and perhaps when you're lower in the map and you have less visibility, then it might potentially be totally different people that you're testing the idea on. What do you say, Johan?
I think the great thing about the Wordly map is that you can really get situational awareness for whether an experiment matters or not. So if it's not visible, the experiment might be that you remove that part or you outsource that part of the value chain somewhere. If you're doing it in-house now, like what we're doing in the project that you mentioned, we're outsourcing something to the cloud, and that's okay. What's happening is that there's going to be some visibility to the end user, but it's not super visible, but it's going to change everything for the organization. Whereas we also had ideas in this project that we're running where the experiments would be very close to the end user. So I think visibility is definitely important, but it won't always decide sort of the impact. That's a sort of roundabout answer, I guess. But,
yeah, and also I'm thinking of as you spoke about, that it's going to change a lot of things for the end users if we do this outsourcing. So if we're doing an experiment with high visibility, then we should experiment on, okay, this change, how would that be? Will you be okay with us solving it this way? But if it's an element or a part that has really low visibility, then it should be the end results probably that you run a lot of the experiments. If you want to talk to end users, then you should show them the end results and experiments, how they perceive the end experiments. Is this really delivering the value that you're hoping to deliver? Or your later stage, and you're actually, if you've already proven that there is a need and there's a willingness to pay, and you have credibility within the area, and then you will experiment on the solution, and you potentially might not have any end users at all in the experiments, but rather is it functional at all?
I actually had a question. That's why I sort of popped up here.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you have any examples where in hindsight, either you or your client or you at Aftonbladet, where you obviously chose the wrong approach? So because you try to do something the way it's always done. Do you have any examples of it?
Let me see. Yes, I have. At Aftonbladet, we were trying to make money. I mean, we switch profits from paper and generate profit online. And one of the ideas we had was to introduce a web shop. The New York Times had a web shop, and we thought maybe that could be something that we could do also. And we got, as we always did, we got 5 teams from Hyper Island, which is a really good interactive design school, to pitch ideas to us. And one of them had this really, really smart idea about, just exchanging one of the ads on the website and test a different product there every day to sort of like see if we could build that behavior within our readers, that they would actually buy things from that they saw on the site. And the way we made decisions on Aftonbladet, that was not by doing things in a small scale to learn from them, but rather we would look for, okay, what is really exciting? What can we get the gut feeling really running on? Or in our corporate management, what will get their gut feeling running, going? And we would look for something that was really spectacular, and that we could, since we were going to do it so big scale, we had to get a lot of money in there. Also, so that's what we did a sports shop basically, and we did millions of investments, even before we even started in small scale. And in hindsight, I really wished we had chosen the small approach instead, because we would have learned so much more. And also, that was, we did the entire pitch as if this was something that was already in product stage. But we did not at all. It was something that was totally custom made, and for us, we had totally new ideas what it was. So it was even Genesis. So we should have started in much smaller scale to prove the need first, basically.
Thanks. I think you have another question in the chat.
Yes. Do you use any software quality attributes as heuristics while doing experiments? I actually don't even understand the question. So we are very seldom involved in development of actual code. But of course, we could also. We've been working a lot with gaming, for example, and then we put a lot of pointers within the code as experiments to sort of like see what users are doing.
Right, I'm gonna turn off my camera and leave you to it, Agnes.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you, everyone. We actually have run out of time, since I promised I will give you all 15 minutes of break before the new session. So I hope I sent some thoughts with you that you can find helpful, and happy mapping in the future. Bye-bye.